Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. I'm Phil Harvey. I'm an editor here at Light Reading, and I am joined on the podcast today by my colleague, Kelsey Zeiser. And our guest today is Chris Pearson. He is the president of 5G Americas. And on this show, we'll talk about COVID-19 and the effect that it's having on the progress of 5G in the Americas. We'll also talk about what we're expecting from standalone 5G as the standards get closer to being completed there and the technology starts making its way to market. And we'll also find out from Chris if he thinks that there's going to be any impact on consumer demand for 5G. And we also get into a little bit about the difference that 5G will make in the IoT market as well. So we cover quite a bit of ground, and it's a pretty quick and enlightening conversation, and we will get to it right after this break. Okay, joining us on the Light Reading Podcast, obviously, we have Kelsey Zeiser as ever. Hello, Kelsey.
Hello, Phil.
And our guest today is Chris Pearson from 5G Americas. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing well. Thanks for being on with us. So we want to talk about 5G in America. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Actually, the biggest thing kind of affecting the entire industry and everybody's lives at the moment, of course, is COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I think a place for us to start would be to talk about what's happening with the progress of 5G. As we get closer to the next release and to non-standalone 5G, what's the pandemic? How has that been affecting the progress of 5G in the industry, especially in North America?
Yeah, I'd say that with the COVID-19 crisis, and a big shout out to all the frontline workers out there and first responders that are out there helping all of us. It shows that how important connectivity is, and we have this need obviously to flatten that curve and social distancing. But social distancing, in essence, is physical distancing, doing what you would normally do, but just not next to people at the office or wherever you might be. So we see great progress at 5G in the U.S. We've seen the major national operators continue to show their commitment to making sure that they're progressing and getting 5G rolled out, as well as continue to fortify their networks to serve the customers. So we have seen a real commitment to continue their 5G rollouts, knowing how important connectivity is, not just today, but tomorrow as we face this crisis.
So it sounds like the pandemic hasn't had a huge impact on slowing those efforts around 5G deployments. Is that right?
No, we haven't seen any public comments from any of the national operators that have said that they've slowed down. In fact, some of them have just recently on their earnings calls reiterated their commitment to not only the current networks of LTE Advanced, but also their 5G deployments. And if you look at the North America, U.S. specifically, we are one of the leaders in the 5G world. There are other areas that also have leading 5G deployments, but overall, if you look kind of at the networks worldwide, North America is definitely one of the leaders in terms of deployments and subscriptions and capabilities of their 5G networks. We expect, well, right now we're at 69 deployments worldwide, and by the end of the year, we still expect about 200. There will be some regions that have stated that they'll be a little bit slower as far as the rollouts, but the U.S. is not one of them. Like I said, we have a real commitment to moving really onward and upward with 5G deployments, and that's great to see as a person that is facing this COVID-19 issue with their family and friends and everybody like yourselves working from home, it's nice to see that commitment from the U.S. operators.
Yeah, it's moving along quickly. I'm glad you mentioned the LTE advanced build outs too, because that's also a critical part of the connectivity that we all need and that we're all dependent on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's still become it gets not talked about quite as much as the new 5G build outs because they're new, but LTE every single day is improving, and the not just the reach but the throughput as well. One of the it reminds me that this that the evolution of the mobile network is always a progression. So we're always progressing from one stage to the next. The next big stage or big kind of mile marker that we see in 5G, at least to my mind, is non-standalone. When we get to this point of having real cloud-based mobile cores and things like that. At 5G Americas, what's your sort of positioning on how quickly we're going to arrive at non-standalone? When are you expecting it, and what sorts of things do you look for that state of 5G to unlock?
Yeah, so standalone is actually, as you mentioned, a very important milestone, and there's a lot to it. It is when you start to look at a standalone, core network technology with 5G new radios, you really get toward what would be kind of the overall master architecture of the 5G network, what was implied in the vision of 5G. So we have seen continued progress on 5G standalone. Most of the operators are working very hard with their vendors on testing and trialing. And most of them around the world, I would say, not just in the US, but around the world, the leading operators have stated that they will begin some of the transition to 5G standalone in 2020. Now, we haven't seen anyone back down at this time from those public statements that were made. Obviously the big question becomes, well, will COVID-19 slow down perhaps not the 5G deployments, but could it actually slow down the increase in the capabilities and features that would be associated with maybe a standalone technology deployment? And I have not seen any of those announcements that have backed down yet. But you have to understand that when you start to move from 5G, non-standalone to a standalone, it takes a lot more capabilities as far as resources, human resources, technology resources. And every operator that I know in my 25 plus years in the industry wants to make sure things are perfect before it gets deployed commercially. So again, I think we've seen great progress. We've seen announcements even by operators and their vendors in the United States on their trials and tests. We've seen their commitment. So it looks like the transition will begin sometime in 2020. And that's, there's not a lot of operators out there in the world that are pounding their fist at this time because of COVID-19 issues on the standalone. But again, I think the U.S. is one of the leaders, and there is a big commitment to continue to progress for our citizens of the United States during this crisis.
Hey, Kelsey, before you ask your question, let me fall on my sword for a second. I asked about non-standalone, but of course, as Chris inferred, my intention was to talk about standalone. So I just had I had non-standalone on the brain because that's where we're at now. What we're going toward is standalone. So
absolutely, yeah, and that's a big transition, and it's a great question. I know you're falling on your sword here, but it really is a great question because
we are doing deployments
with 5G throughout the nation, and you've seen big commitments. But going from NSA to SA is a big commitment too.
Indeed.
So switching gears just a little bit, you've posted, or 5G Americas has submitted a few really interesting reports on light readings 5G exchange, and one of them was on 5G, the future of IoT. What are some of the use cases for 5G powered IoT, and what's the real catalyst for 5G in the IoT market?
I think you probably one of the what I would say the bigger heavyweights to lift when it comes to IoT is how do you support the massive IoT opportunity out there? And when you look at LTE, the way it was designed, and then we had to actually move back to the standard and then actually really kind of modify it for IoT. What we're doing with 5G and IoT is from the very beginning looking at architecture that will move us from supporting millions of devices to billions and billions of devices, and at a basically with a network architecture that would provide you competitive efficiencies against other proprietary solutions out there, or even unlicensed solutions. So when it comes to say what are the types of IoT opportunities, you could actually think about IoT connections, even from a standpoint of things like when you start connecting your car to your city. Cellular V2X has been around as a term, but what we're looking at as we go to 5G, more capabilities with that. And same with, and when I say, the cellular V2X with 5G, it's really connecting it to everything. So it's the pedestrian that you don't see around that corner. It's the bicycle that's in your blind spot. It's your entertainment system for your kids that are in the back. It's for your traffic congestion that helps you get through your city so that we don't keep spending billions and billions of dollars on tunnels and bridges and roads, but start to put them into the connectivity pot instead of the infrastructure pot in the normal sense of infrastructure. There's also lots of areas with industrial IoT where if you go into an automated factory today, what you see is, a lot of great automation, but a lot of limitations because of cabling and basically access points or endpoints. And so what happens when you start to think about sensors and logistics and not having any of the cabling, you start to see about automated processes that are not only just on your factory floor, but even outside your factory floor, so that the whole entire automated factory becomes a mesh network inside and outside your factory. So those are just a couple of the examples, but there's a lot of opportunities. But the key heavyweight or heavy lift here for our technology is to get to an architecture where we support not just millions of devices, but billions of devices and sensors.
Okay. That makes sense. And that reminds me a little bit of a recent video we also posted to the 5G Exchange from Verizon on their efforts around connected cars, and echoed what you were saying about how it's more than just, the technology in the car. It's also helping alert you to, what pedestrians might be doing, perhaps traffic patterns. I think the pedestrian thing would be really helpful for me at night because a lot of people walk in my neighborhood with dark clothing on.
Oh, absolutely. Well, actually, it's quite interesting because you've seen some insurance companies make announcements or advertisements that they're, because of this COVID-19 and fewer people are actually driving, that they're giving refunds up to like 25% for a month or two or something like that. But it is actually kind of interesting to think about how many people, because we're flattening the curve, are working from home. They're still productive. And yet, if you start to think about how we deal with congestion in what would be considered the legacy manner, our legacy manner of dealing with congestion is to build bridges, dig tunnels, and build more roads. Those roads, by the time they're built, typically are full. But what happens if you start to implement, investments in infrastructure and sensors and things like that allow you to build your infrastructure in the broadband sense, and even start to manage or provide guidelines on the timing of when you should be commuting and when you shouldn't be commuting and things like that. There's a lot of opportunity for saving lives, but there's also a lot of opportunity for efficiencies if we can manage congestion differently than we have in kind of our legacy manners that we've done in the last 40 years.
Yeah, that would be great. We have a stretch of highway here that we call the 40 parking lot because it just gets so terrible during rush hour. Luckily, I don't have to like take that path anywhere around 5 o'clock. But even, anywhere from 4 to 7 p.m., it's just you don't want to go that way if you can avoid it. So having those kind of insights would really be helpful once people are returning to their commutes, and perhaps some people will continue working from home, and that'll also alleviate some of that congestion.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the we talk a lot about network traffic patterns having changed since the COVID-19 pandemic sent everybody home. Actual traffic patterns are about to change as well. I think it was Twitter, one of the big web scale companies had said that they were giving their workers permission to work from home indefinitely, to just simply say like, hey, if being at home, at your job is okay for you, then even when we go back to the office, you don't have to, come back to the office full time. And I think that's, especially in cities like San Francisco, where I think Twitter's headquarters is south of Market in San Francisco, one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world, and also one of the most congested, thoroughfares in the world, going up the Bay Area to Twitter headquarters. That's a big step, and I think, boy, that tells me that the type and variety of connectivity that we have as consumers and as work from home folks is definitely going to just only increase in importance as we go.
Yeah, and if you offer the flexibility of working partially from home and partially from work, you can really start to target the non-congested times for your employees to make probably more productive and more happy, and there's going to be a lot to that, I think, as we look to the future.
It seems like folks are actually working more on the weekends. I imagine especially parents with, young kids that are just trying to balance everything. So in some ways, it seems like workers are almost more productive at home, whereas, previously employers were concerned that they would just be, maybe napping and doing laundry all day.
Yeah, exactly.
So Chris, we'll end on this. What is the thing that we can expect, in the U.S. and in North America? What's the next kind of mile markers for 5G as you see it, in terms of progress of not just the technology, but maybe the adoption, and maybe if you want to, if this is an easy answer, do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to affect the consumer demand one way or the other as far as that goes?
Yeah, I think the next progress really is continued deployments of the 5G networks, so that the coverage continues to get better with 5G, and that we also get more and more devices in the hands of consumers and business people that utilize the 5G networks. It's very difficult to know for sure if the demand side will be affected, because I think the big unknown is today's economy and tomorrow's economy with COVID-19, and also the fact that many of the retail stores that are kind of the typical areas for the consumer to browse and buy are not open, although they are starting to reopen. But the online is becoming a bigger and bigger channel, which we all knew it was big already, but continues to get bigger. So I think it's really the milestones are, again, we're going to see continued increases in network coverage of 5G, continued growth in the subscriptions of the technology. In fact, if you kind of look out down to 2023, we still are projecting about 200 million 5G subscribers by 2023 in North America. And then the third area will be this trend to start to move to the more features and capabilities as there's a transition to standalone that's going to start by the end of this year. Again, it's just the beginning of that process, I believe, but for most operators. But then you get to more of the true architecture and a lot more feature capabilities with 5G than what we're showing right now with just kind of the enhanced mobile broadband family of use cases. When you go to standalone, you get many more capabilities of your network, and I think that will be a big milestone starting, again, later this year, most likely.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Chris. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and hope you continue to stay safe and healthy during the pandemic.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here. And if people do want any more information from us, we have a very active website at 5gamericas.org. And again, you guys stay safe and stay healthy, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris. That is it. That's our show. Thanks so much to Chris Pearson from 5G Americas for his time and insights today. Thanks to our producer, Tien Fu, because if it weren't for him, you wouldn't hear any of this. Thanks to you, dear listener, because if you weren't paying attention, we wouldn't be able to get away with doing all of this at work or at home or wherever we might be connecting from in the pandemic world. Please do tell a friend to subscribe, and thanks so much for listening to the Light Reading Podcast. And please do check out the 5G Exchange. Kelsey Zeiser is our curator of content for the 5G Exchange. Everything that gets posted on that site has to pass muster with her, and she's a very accomplished gatekeeper in that regard. And also, Chris Pearson and people like that who are leading voices in the industry are frequent contributors to the content on the 5G Exchange. So please do check that out. It's at www.the5gexchange.com. And I believe in the podcast, Chris Pearson also plugged his site, and I'll do the same for him. That's 5gamericas.org. So go to 5gamericas.org. Also go to the5gexchange.com. And thanks for listening to the Light Reading Podcast.